Now, I want to start with the biggest story, or at least what I would consider to be the biggest story of the week, and it's the biggest thing that happened on Monday Night Raw, and you might disagree. You might think that the Punk and Rollins and McIntyre segment were something that's really worth getting into today. I don't necessarily agree with that to the same level, but I'm going to get into the thing that had me the most intrigued, that had me the most excited, that had me with my phone and my laptop up while down covering. For those of you who don't know what I do during a lot of the week, when the Philadelphia Flyers and the NHL have a home game, I go down and host a pregame, intermission, and postgame show in the balcony level of Wells Fargo Center. It's actually a side gig. It's not even my regular day job, but I go down and I do that. So I'm typically paying full attention to the game. But one thing had my attention that wasn't the game on the ice. It's a guy who made his debut in the WWE, and it's why I said that it's all part of a much larger conversation that needs to be had about AEW and where things stand. It was the debut of Penta, not Pentagon Jr., not Penta El Cero M, not Penta El Cero Miedo, not Penta El Cero Cero Miedo, Miedo Cero Miedo. Just Penta. Imagine that, just going with a simple name, Penta. Okay, we have seen for weeks now different kinds of leading graphics, right? Not really promos of any kind. Just nice graphics that eventually cued that, oh, it's going to be Penta. And then the day of Raw, all of the big aggregators and the insiders and all of those sites and blogs, they happen to point out the fact that, well, at that point, WWE.com was already selling Penta merch, including the man's likeness on the site. So it was kind of spoiled ahead of time, but if you don't live online and you just tune in on every Monday night to watch Raw on Netflix. I don't know if you know Raw's on Netflix, but Raw's on Netflix. Maybe they'll talk about it 40 more times on the next telecast. Penta makes his debut against Chad Gable. Penta did a bunch of things in this match that you might not have been used to seeing him do in AEW. He did pull back a little bit. He pulled back a little bit of the high flying in this match. But he sold in this match. There was in-ring psychology. Chad Gable worked more of a Mexican-style match. And it worked. The man was over with the crowd from the second that generic-ass Def Rebel music hit. From the second that music hit to the second that those fire pyros went off behind him, to him pulling on the mask, to him revealing himself, to taking off the jacket, giving some high fives, getting in the ring, pointing around the ring. That man was over. Now, some people, probably AEW fans, we're like, whoa, that's very interesting because the WWE fans say that they don't watch AEW, so how in the world could they have possibly reacted to this Penta fellow if they've never watched AEW? To which I respond, there is a good chance that WWE fans who don't live online may have looked up who Penta is, especially after last week when it was announced, shown on that graphic that Penta was perhaps going to be debuting soon. And they looked up Penta, and they found his work in Lucha Underground and in TNA and in AEW. How about that? And maybe even in AAA. Maybe they saw him there as well. And they went, oh, this guy's very good. I like this Penta guy. He doesn't look like every other luchador that has been brought in that has served the luchador purpose in WWE for years. Penta looks different. Penta's unique. So he was over from the second he got out there. Wrestled a match that I honestly thought he hurt his knee. I really did. He sold it that well. Looked great. He and Gable had a wonderful match together. Penta's accomplishments in Lucha Underground were brought up by Michael Cole on commentary. The TNA World Championship was also brought up on TV, which was also of note. His time in AEW, as you would expect, not mentioned. But if you watch that match, and especially if you're like me and you've watched every single Penta match in AEW, can you honestly say that there have been many more times where he's been presented as more of a single star than he was in that moment in this first match in San Jose, the second episode of Raw on Netflix? Because if we're being real here, there were times that Penta had star power. I go back to the cage match between the Lucha Bros and the Young Bucks, where the Lucha Bros came out with the tag titles, but that wasn't as a single star. And honestly, one of the things I found most perplexing and most frustrating about Penta's time in AEW is that he was booked to kind of be a singles loser, which, by the way, happens a lot in AEW, where guys that the company kind of builds up as tag team wrestlers don't find a lot of success in singles. It almost pigeonholes you into believing they don't have the ability to win a singles match. I look at Dax Harwood, a very good wrestler, a very good tag team wrestler, but whenever he has a singles match, it's a good match, but he doesn't win. For a long time, it felt like Mark Briscoe, who, yes, along with his brother Jay, were one of the best tag teams of their generation. It sure felt like when he first got into AEW, he couldn't win singles matches because he was known as a tag team guy. And that list, by the way, goes on and on. Ray Phoenix had some big wins, was booked more of the successful of the single star between him and Penta, but I thought a lot of times also got kind of tossed to the side, was just kind of cannon fodder for other guys that they were trying to elevate to the main card. So Penta makes this debut. He gets the win. The commentary team puts him over in a big way. And then he does something, and again, I could be wrong, and you are more than welcome to point it out if I am, and I will eat crow if I am wrong. But then Penta cuts a promo that's roughly like 60-40 Spanish. But he cuts a decent enough promo in English, cuts a passionate promo to all of his fans in the arena and in Mexico, gets a big pop when he starts speaking in Spanish. And he talks about how this is what happens when a Mexican wrestler chases down his dream. He says, "This is my new home. I have been waiting for this. It's not just the Netflix new era, it's the Penta new era." I mean, for God's sake, like if we're being real here, right? If you try to think, how many times did Penta cut an English promo in AEW? I think of Alex Abrahantes, who seems like a lovely guy. But what was the thing? Penta says, where Alex Abrahantes is meant to be kind of like the mouthpiece of Penta, because Penta would only ever really speak Spanish in his promos. Now, was this just a really well-rehearsed thing, or perhaps could they have leaned on Penta to speak English at least a little bit in AEW to get him aligned with the crowd? You know, one of the things that I saw in the aftermath of this, and then I heard on podcasts all throughout the week, where I don't know what he said, and McAfee said this on commentary. I don't know what he said, but I loved it. And what you got, even if you don't speak Spanish, I happen to, but if you don't, you at least could understand the passion that he was cutting that promo with. And I just walked away from this entire thing, from the match, from the presentation, from the promo, and I said, oh boy, if you're an AEW wrestler, the balance of power has shifted tremendously in a few years since Vince McMahon was ousted from WWE. You look at how Cody Rhodes was getting booed out of the building. Everybody wanted him to turn heel, or a lot of people wanted him to turn heel at the end of his AEW run. He goes off and becomes this mega star in WWE with virtually the same presentation that he had in AEW. But he goes back to the company that he got his start with, the company that some people associate with his dad with because of NXT especially. He becomes the top babyface in the company, ultimately becomes the undisputed champion. You look at somebody like Jade Cargill, who is green and who was given an undefeated streak in AEW, and then ultimately chooses to leave and hasn't found the same kind of singles success, at least winning gold, but was put in a tag team with Bianca Belair. And the star power was still very much there. And you look at Jade Cargill and you say, how do you botch having somebody with the kind of star power and the same kind of aura and the look that she has? How do you let that person leave? That's another one. Now, you could make a case that Brian Pillman Jr. going off and doing his thing in NXT, whether that's worked or not, and whether or not Ethan Page leaving and becoming NXT champion has been inspired or not. And he had an interview where he talked about his time in AEW versus WWE this week, which I'm not getting into. No offense to Ethan Page. It's just not worth it right now. But if you look at how they're marketing these stars who make the jump, and your contract is coming up in AEW, is there any point to staying? And I mean that, again, as somebody who has supported that company since its inception, who has purchased nearly every AEW pay-per-view over the last 4 years, maybe not the first year. I don't think I paid for, and I certainly didn't illegally stream the first year of pay-per-views. So let's say like the last 4. Like, I actively choose to support that company. And yet, I am flabbergasted by how they botched Penta. I am shocked by how they apparently have botched Malachi Black, who got to taste trios gold, who wrestled sporadically for a few years, who it felt like anytime he wrestled a singles match, there was speculation that he was leaving the company, and then he'd have to go onto Instagram and he'd have to post a video saying, I'm healthy, I'm available to work, I don't know why I'm not working, which sounds very similar to what Ricky Starks has been saying, which apparently seems at least somewhat similar to what Miro, in the very rare opportunity that anyone's gotten anything out of Miro, sounds like he just doesn't want to show up to work based on creative, but is otherwise healthy. Those guys, like if you're a Malachi Black, there was just a report right before I went live with the show that people in WWE view Aleister Black as being a guy with legitimate main event singles potential. And I agree. And I have been wondering for years now, why is Malachi Black not in a main event position? Why are Buddy Matthews and Brody King not chasing secondary gold? Or why didn't Malachi have a singles title and Buddy and Brody could have gone off and had the tag team titles? What are we doing? So if you're Malachi Black, you leave. There's not even a second thought. If you're Miro, whenever that contract comes up, you go back. If you're Ricky Starks, who apparently is going to be working against Santana, I forget what the name of the promotion is, but it looks like at least for now, Ricky Starks is going to be allowed to go have a match elsewhere. Like, you're not going back to AEW. There's no grander plan in place. There's no invasion angle of all the disgruntled wrestlers that Tony Khan has forgotten about all the toys that are sitting at the bottom of the toy box. Those guys are done. There's no chance that they're going to get used. They're going to go to WWE, and they're going to be made to look like legitimate stars. And I'll tell you what, here's the one positive, okay? If you're like me, and you're currently sort of a disaffected or a disgruntled AEW fan, here's the good news. At least a lot of the people that you like that aren't getting presented on TV, they'll have the chance to go to WWE, and that company right now certainly looks like they know how to turn those people into stars, or to take whatever star power they had and elevate it exponentially. That's maybe the only good takeaway that I can have as somebody who continues to question what the hell AEW is doing.